Hey, this is Pops, and I want to talk about Tetris, an Apple TV movie that really is. I mean, it's really more interesting than I probably can explain because a biopic about the making of a video game like Tetris, it kind of caught my attention. Like, wow, it's just kind of a cool thing. I didn't know all this history. I didn't know any of this, and as I was looking into it just at least a little bit, it's tied to Matthew Vaughn, who did the Kingsman movie. That's probably his most popular franchise, amongst many other things. And Taron Egerton is in this. And it was described as The Big Short and Bridge of Spies. And I'm like, huh, all right. Now, what is interesting is it's actually a biopic about Henk Rogers. Now, he works for this software company. He's basically a complete failed video game designer, but while he's at the show trying to market his own game, which is a complete disaster, he runs across Tetris, who was created by this Soviet programmer, Alexey Pajitnov. Anyway, Alexei, and he works for this company called Elorg, which is basically a bunch of letters that mean he works for the Soviet Union because there you're not allowed to make money on your own. He had made this game kind of in his own spare time, and it's this perfect game, right? And the film centers around how to get this game to market and then how the rights and the business elements, and that's where the Big Short comes in. Like, it's all the complexity of contracts and what's in a contract and the intrigue under the veil of we're dealing with the Soviet Union as a major player in all this in the middle of the Cold War, right before the wall falls, or at the height of conspiracy, the height of tensions, everything like that is what plays out. I thought it was best to just sort of like give you like a couple of moments here because there's not a way because a lot of the stuff that you see in the trailer also omits some of these other elements. So this is kind of like how they play with some of the graphics many times. This is the opening where he's going to the software company in Vegas, right? And you have some of these moments I think that really help keep you grounded into where you are. Like it keeps something very unique and interesting with this film compared to a standard biopic or something like that. It moves pretty quickly, as you can see with Hank, and he's just enamored. And we saw this with the trailer footage where he's just like, "I've got to have this." Right? The cast is great. He everything for him is stacked against him, right? Because he has to move through. I love this game to banking. This is Alexei. This is the Soviet guy who buys the rights. His name is Stein. And basically, he is the government broker to make money outside the scope of the Soviet Union. This is the basically, lack of a better term, the douchebag corporate guy who's, always trying to get ahead on someone. It's called, his name is Maxwell. And again, this is a biopic. These are all real people, right? And it is it is a lot of him and his son. His son's name is Kevin, who are also trying to manipulate the situation to get all their rights. Now he's telling the story to his banker to get money because he has to figure out how to get all this to work, right? All right, so they're playing this guy. This is the banker, and then this is the grow. They do graphics and transitions. So you have this, and they kind of boop. There you go. I have to be honest. That kept you on the move because a lot of information happens. Okay, so this guy here on the left in this suit, again, very cliches. Um, he's sort of like a little bit of like the covert muscle in the film for the communist side, right? And then you have these great moments that you have with transitions where he's like, okay, I'm going to do this, going to do that. He meets with Nintendo. He's going to do this. This is how we're going to move forward on this, how we're going to move forward on that. And that's how the movie kind of moves along. And uh, everything about the film is very believable. And it kind of like, at least it's interesting that we can have sort of a backstory that many of us would not have known about a game that, and it's going to culminate. Tetris does come out with the Game Boy, of course, right? So we know this in game. We understand the concept of what Nintendo was able to accomplish. Um, I just liked all of that. I know there's probably a lot of creative liberties, and we'll get to the part at the end of the movie, which I did not care for, but um, like, there is some tensions with him and his wife, and he quite literally bets his house, right? Needs enough money, quite literally bets his house in the grand scheme of all of this, in the middle of this negotiation that's going sideways because everyone is lied and manipulated about what rights they have. So, for those of you who are not super familiar, too familiar with, the evolution of computers and things like that, it was the definition of a computer, which would have a keyboard, versus like a console that would not have a keyboard, would determine who might have rights to do something. Then you might have arcade rights. Then you might have handheld rights. Those are the key elements of a movie like The Big Short, which I did on a Throwback Thursday. I can put a link in the description for Throwback Thursday's Big Short conversation, because at least these are things that are kind of giving you a very cursory view, a very high level view of how some of this stuff actually operates and is used. The real film is set about more like a spy movie because he's treated that way. He's treated as a spy. It's illegal to go into this government building. Who can he trust? Thrown out of buildings. Everything is about, I'll see you tomorrow. He's like, okay, we got a deal. I'll see you tomorrow. There's tons of numbers thrown around, some that are low and some that are high. Like we go from like throwing around numbers like, I'll give you 25,000 or $50,000 for this, and then suddenly we're throwing around numbers like millions of dollars, and you're like, okay, in 1988, 89, $1 million is a massive amount of money. So there's like some things that have changed and evolved very quickly in the movie. And the movie is so fast paced with so much stuff happening. I actually have to say that's probably the biggest criticism I have for the film. The film never takes a pause. It never takes moments for Hank to really be broken down by how every card is stacked against him, right? Sure, he misses his daughter's recital type thing and stress with the wife and all of that, but you don't get it. You don't get enough of that weight, enough of that sort of like gravity of the hopelessness of it. I also think there's so much stuff happening with the Russians and the different factions, and I wish they had had maybe uh, a better presentation or a better casting, maybe of a couple of the characters to make it a little bit easier to kind of enjoy the ride more. Like it just becomes like information dump, a lot of chaos, things like that. And then you get to the final act of the film, and this is where um, I think the director kind of loses the script a little bit. Like John Baird does a fine job. I think that it is a good film. I think it's something I would recommend watching, especially if you're interested in any of these elements or you have um, you have a love of biopics, maybe the Tetris thing. Oh, it'd be kind of fun to throw this on and see what it's kind of about. The last act of the movie becomes kind of ridiculous because it becomes about more like everyone ends up in a room screaming at each other. You have this literal car chase to the airport, very much like the end of Argo, where they're trying to escape the Iranian regime and get out of the country safe. Well, literally, Hank and the other guys are trying to literally get out of the country on this airplane, safely escape the communists. So it's rushed and has this sort of like, hammered together ending that I don't particularly care for. Um, I will say though, there are some moments that are freaking great. Like, so there's, he's constantly being threatened. You're not a tourist. You're actually here on business. That's illegal. You can't do this. That's illegal. And when he has this conversation with Alexey really says what hopefully people can get away from this movie was, uh, he says, Alexei, I don't have a right to make money from my game. And Hank says, well, that's criminal. He says, no, that's communism. And I thought to myself, wow, this movie is sending a message of like education. Like it's not trying to pass a massive moral judgment on the desire to have communism or whatever, but it's definitely giving you a snapshot of what was actually happening at the end of the communist regime in Russia and how communist was collapsing and how even if you were a creative, even if you were an innovator, you didn't own it. You might have a little small stipend, you might have a little bit of money that comes your way just because of separation of class in that country. You're more valuable to the regime, but not to the level of you would have the gaming rights for this to go global. No, that would be part of Mother Russia. Mother Russia would have the gaming rights. Mother Russia would be making the money. Mother Russia's reputation is what's on the line. And that is also what is explained of why they treat him as an enemy and why the finances matter, because they look at it more like, well, if we sell our rights here, then we'll sell our rights again. Then we'll sell our rights again. And you basically are seeing capitalism take over communism, because you're seeing the value of money, the value of markets, all of that come into play. And you have to put that up against, well, what does the Soviet Union want to look like on the global stage? Do they just want to look like this iron-fisted control uh, government that won't allow its citizens, to put anything out into the world while everyone else does? Or do you want to try to play this game? And it is an interesting dynamic that they at least get into the script, and they at least sort of get into. And it's kind of crazy to think Tetris, of all things, is one of the areas there that this kind of comes to light and is done relatively well. There is also some, like, there's a couple great moments because he has to have a translator, and he ends up, like, because she's cute, he ends up taking on this female translator. And yes, she really does exist. I had to look that up. And obviously, she's a plant. She works for the KGB, the Russians, as well. She gets a kiss. She's like, just throws herself on him to kiss him, and they get a photo. That's all they need, even though he rejects her and pushes her away. Like, I'm married. I love my wife. Doesn't matter. They got their photo. They show the Russians throw up at the Russians show up at his house to kind of put some intimidation into his wife and his family. Just a lot of the tactics come to light, and especially when you have a book like White Pill, which Michael Malice put together, which really deals with a lot of um, regimes like, well, it deals with the Russian regime, in particular the Soviets, but you really get into, like, the control of humans, right? You really get into all of that. I really do think that there were some moments that were kind of derailed from some of that, but again, this is at least framed in real life. But I think it's because it's so fast and there's so much information. Um, Whereas Big Short, I think, had these diffuse moments. And again, I know people don't like The Big Short. They think it doesn't do this and doesn't do that. And I do get that. But at least it starts you down the rabbit hole of doing some of your research and understanding. This film tried to throw too much of that on screen. And then you feel almost like you just kind of get lost in the weeds a little bit instead of enjoying, the human and emotional part that we connect with the most. Um, that's all. That's all I felt. So a recommend, not a hard recommend. If I had to do my old school ratings, I would go like 3 stars on this. Solid. Maybe a little bit more if you're really into Tetris and gaming history. You like biopics and history, that kind of thing. If you like Cold War movies, spy, stuff like that. It's kind of weird to think about a spy movie tied to Tetris, but it does have a lot of those elements. I think you would enjoy the film as well. So anyway, had done a review for a minute, had this out there, wanted to make sure I got through this. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Love your recommendations. Keep them coming. I appreciate you so much for watching. I am Pops.